Hello everyone, this is MMA Sherdog for the Bluff to Spot High Stakes course. This is going to be part 1 of a 2-part 5-minute Zoom series in which I will be putting everything I showed throughout the course into practice. I'll be playing without a HUD today and focus on fundamentally sound play as well as some exploitative adjustments. I also won't be using anything like a random number generator and try and keep my strategy fairly simple. So let's start. Let's call the top left table number 1, top right number 2, bottom left number 3, and bottom right number 4. So on the first table, Queen Jack suited. This is a hand you generally want to be calling. We may be opening a little bit looser because the big blind is an unknown who doesn't have a full stack. Therefore, the small blind may be 3-betting us with a slightly wider range because he wants to get that extra full equity. Queen Jack suited is almost always going to be a call. You could maybe 4-bet at a very low frequency. Pocket threes here is very close. So the small blind is irregular and he used a somewhat normal sizing. The low pocket pairs sometimes get folded. And queens, I 3-bet button versus cutoff. And I'm facing a 4-bet. This is a hand you generally want to be jamming with. If I wanted to trap, I would trap with a hand like aces, let's say, which is a little bit stronger. Or I would just be calling with a hand which is a lot weaker, which cannot value jam. A hand like pocket eights, let's say. On table 4, I open king 7 in the small blind. This is normally a bit too loose, but the small blind is a recreational player. And from the little I can remember from him, he has not been too aggressive yet. If he's a recreational player who 3-bets a lot and just puts a lot of pressure on you, you should still be tight. Against half pot, Queen Jack suited seems like an easy call. It doesn't really make sense to turn this hand into a bluff raise, and folding obviously is out of the question as well. On the turn, had he bet the turn for around 20 blinds, it would have been pretty close. But we are blocking king-queen. We are blocking queen-10. We're blocking no spades or diamonds. And if we're behind, we almost for sure still have okay equity. So we likely would have ended up calling. Against a check on the turn, I think our hand is a clear check behind. It's one of those hands that really doesn't want to get check raised all in. Our hand isn't strong enough to bet for value, but it's way too strong to be bluffing with. If you wanted to turn the hand into a bluff, you could, for instance, pick a hand like ace-3 of spades, or even start picking a hand like 9-10. But queen jack is just a bit too strong. From the small blind against middle position on table 3, we'll just play a 3-better fold. Not only do I think that's a very good strategy, that also makes sure that we pay less rake by not having any cold calls. Because when we see a flop, the pot gets raked. But if we take it on pre-flop, like we did just now, we pay no rake. King 7 is an extremely easy fold. That would be a disaster if we called that hand. Our hand is dominated, not suited, completely unplayable. Even against a smaller sizing, we'd be folding. And now with Queen Jack suited, I see myself betting here. This is obviously pretty close. It's unlikely he has a better 2-pair because you would have to have exactly King-Queen, and he may have bet the turn already, and maybe he bets the river. Pocket queens is also one combo, so we're mostly worried about a 10 here, which he should be checking at a decent frequency because we can so easily have a 10 as well, so it's not as if we only have weak bluff catchers here. So this is a very close spot, and I think that we're getting called by more worse hands than by better. If you're playing in a very nitty player pool in which people don't really call down at all, you can just check this behind. One of the nice things about betting here is that our range is so protected that if we get check raised, we can just easily fold. And we can just start by defending with our 10s. Deuces is a close open under the gun. On a very aggressive table, you can fold. 5-3 suited is also not a standard open, but there is a presumably weaker player in the big blind, so I'm going to open my range up a little bit, but of course not too much, because the button is an aggressive and good regular, and he's going to be 3-betting me a decent amount, which does happen, and 5-3 suited is just not going to be a call. Our hand is not playable enough out of position. So here we got some reads on this small blind player. He min-donked and then called trips, and he had a tricky timing. So you'll see that a lot of recreational players tend to be a bit unorthodox, and they'll do things that are unexpected. And that's actually a good thing sometimes. That's something that some recreationals do better than regulars. And then he min 3-bet a gut shot. Okay. So he's got some kind of moves. So we don't know too much about him yet. King 8 is pretty close here. Since he made some kind of tricky plays already, I think it's more likely that he's got some kind of decent hand when he checks. So this hand, we end up betting twice usually. So we can check back the flop and bet turn or river, or call twice, or we bet the turn and the river ourselves. I elected to check back here without the backdoor flush draw, and with my small read that he may be a bit stronger than others. It is a very good board for him. So when he does not c-bet, it does raise a few flags. So now he bets 2 into 5.7. I would say this is probably a bit of a tell that he's probably not bluffing. He probably doesn't have absolutely nothing, but he also doesn't have anything strong. So at this point, our king is basically always the best hand. And you can maybe say, is this, a GTO play? It doesn't really matter when your opponent's strategy is a little bit face up. So it's a nice hand to be raising for value. And then when the river's bad, you can even check back. And if the river's good for you, or a blank, then you can keep on betting. Also, since we have the read that he min-donk called with trips, if he were to bet small and now re-raises, we can probably end up folding, because we already saw him do it with a good hand before. King 10 on table 2 is close. The player in the big blind is unmarked, so it is probably going to be an open raise, but if you're facing high frequency 3-betters behind you, or people who flat call a lot, then it may just be a fold. Either way, the EV difference is minimal. Sevens, easy call. And we'll call the flop depending on the bet size. Okay. So with sevens here, we are playing against an under the gun range, and he c-bet a little bit on the bigger side. I think if we have a club, we probably can't fold, but without the club, I think this is going to be a very close fold. Obviously, if we had an 8, we would never be folding. The small blind donks on table 2. He's probably saying I have a lot of sets in my range as well as high equity hands, and I don't really miss his board very often, so I'm going to lead out, probably with my whole range, or at least very often. That's a bit of an unorthodox play, but it's not necessarily bad. I would prefer not to do that though. This is kind of close. On the one hand, we have top pair with a solid kicker. On the other hand, our hand is never really going to get better. It's only going to get worse. And if he were to 3-bet, we would have to fold. So I would say most of the time you just want to end up calling here. But of course, when he bets that small, we still have to have a decent amount of raises. If he were to just, let's say, overbet the flop, then we could end up raising very rarely. So it's kind of close, but I think call is best. On the jack turn, he could have easily hit king queen or king jack or something like that. He can still check some type of hand like a set. So it's a nice hand to just check behind. And he bets less than a third of the pot. This is kind of awkward. So when we call the flop, we're still not gonna have an ace too often, right? Because, I mean, we're not calling hands like ace 5 of spades on the flop, for instance, even against a small bet. We're gonna obviously have hands like ace 9, or hands like maybe like ace jack with a club, or hands like ace 6 suited. So we mostly improve to 2 pair here, but we don't improve to 1 pair too often. So he has to be bluffing here with a hand like 6 7, pocket 7s, pocket 4s, stuff like that. I think it's all pretty close. I think bluff raising makes a little bit of sense. Representing a hand like ace 10. I think calling makes sense, especially given these pot odds. I mean, we only need to be winning 17% of the time. I think folding is also reasonable, as I said, because it's going to be difficult for him to bluff. Since this guy is a very good player, in my opinion, I think he's going to show up with enough bluffs that we can call here. If you're facing a weaker player who is more face up, you may just want to fold or turn your hand into a bluff. Obviously, you have to be careful that you don't just turn any hand like king 10, queen 10, 9, 8, 7s, 8s, whatever into a bluff, because then you're way overdoing it. Because obviously you're not representing that many hands. So he also has king 10, which is, kind of a funny play. On the first table, I opened ace 6 suited, which is standard. Somebody who've never played against cold calls. I think it makes a lot of sense to do check at a high frequency on a board like this, even though the board is kind of dry. If the cutoff flat's a tight range, he's going to have hands like ace queen a lot, 6s, 9s, just hands like king jack suited that don't have a pair yet but have decent backdoors. It's going to be hard to just bet small here and get him off any hand. And he has some good hands, as I said. So since this player is an unknown, maybe he's a bit weaker and his flat calling range is much wider. So then it makes a bit more sense to start c-betting again, because if he starts flat calling hands like king 10 offsuit, king 9 offsuit, pocket 3s, etc., there's much more value to be gained. So I think with this hand, I actually should have just bet and not try to, let's say, pot control. He bets really, really small. Again, it's a little bit awkward. I think calling is probably the best play. I think calling is a little bit of an underplay, but then raising is an overplay. I would prefer a call here. King 3 suited on the fourth table is an easy fold. We always call this hand pre-flop, and then against a bigger bet, we don't have to do anything else but fold. Raising is way too aggressive. I like my call with a6. Blocker-wise, our hand would not be bad to be calling turn with, in the sense that we block 6s and ace-queen, and we also unblock every single straight draw. So if he were perfectly polarized, this would actually be a pretty good calling hand, but the thing is, when he bets 4.5 into 11, he can easily be betting with hands like 7s, 8s, a 9, a weaker queen, or whatever, so then I like it a bit less. I almost prefer him to bet bigger than this sizing. I think he probably is not bluffing, but he probably has something slightly better than our hand. And if our hand is behind, we don't have that much equity. So I would say we just got to fold here. So with pocket jacks, I would not really have a cold calling range in this spot. I don't think that works very well. If, let's say, he 3-bets between 14 and 20% of the time, jacks just has a ton of equity, over 60% in fact. So I think this is an easy value raise and get Ginge out of the pot. I made it a medium size. On the one hand, we cannot go too big because Ginge would be getting a great price on a shove. On the other hand, we don't want to go too small because we're pretty deep with the small blind. So I think the sizing is pretty cool. I expect him to do quite a bit of calling when he's this deep. He's thinking and he re-raises. So this is really awkward. If we fold this hand, we would definitely be overfolding. On the other hand, I would say that if you are playing in kind of a softer pool where people are weak, you can fold this because they just always do this with aces and kings. This player is more capable though, so against him I will not be folding. But guys, be careful. There's a lot of people who just do this only with aces and then just end up folding even though your pot odds are pretty good. Shoving, I think, is absolutely out of the question this deep. Especially in position when we can maneuver a bit more. And this flop is actually kind of good for us, as in it's so bad that we can easily fold. So if he were bluffing with, let's say, you know, ace-5 suited or ace-10 suited or something like that, or, you know, maybe like king-jack suited, whatever, he still got us beat. So he would have to 4-bet like 10s, or he would have to 4-bet some kind of suited connector for us to be ahead. So this is not a hand we'd be calling in case he bets. We're also going to slow play hands like aces and kings for sure sometimes pre-flop. I mean, we have 155 behind and a pot of 119, so it's going to be very easy to get the money in if we have a hand like aces. We're also going to have hands like maybe ace-king, hands like ace-queen suited, let's say. So he checks. A lot of people just always bet here, but this is not necessarily a mistake. So I think here we don't really want to do much betting, right? Because even though we have aces and kings sometimes, we have him at a discounted frequency, whereas he always has them. And then we also have more of the in-between hands. So this should be going check-check quite often. On table 3, ace-king 4. So this is a board on which you can use multiple strategies. You can bet big with a polarized range, or you can bet small with a depolarized range. If you want to know more about that, check out the imposition play video. Against a presumed recreational player, we can play a little bit more of a face-up strategy. I think this hand serves a little bit better as a check back. On table 4 with ace-4 suited, this is another board in which you can do many things. We can bet third pot with a very wide range, or we can bet larger. For the sake of the video, I decided to use the high frequency c-bet style here, which is what I recommend for most of you guys. Even though I think every strategy makes sense on this board. So with king jack now, one he checks. I think we have the best hand basically always. The issue is that it's going to be tough to get value from worse on multiple streets. And he will just have a lot of air. So I don't even mind checking behind and then calling any river for any reasonable sizing. Ace-4 here. Both options make sense. On the one hand, we want to check back an ace sometimes because we want to not only check back weekends and be in trouble on the river. On the other hand, there's a lot of protection to be had with our range. I think with ace-4, mostly you want to end up checking behind, but it's very close. It really depends on your c-bet strategy, actually, on the flop. If nit bets here, especially 5 into 8, I mean, this is going to be a very easy call. We unblock all of his air, all of the 8-7s, queen jacks, and all that type of stuff. So yeah, he bluffed here with queen 10, so easy call. I would say if we have a king, we also have a pretty clear call. He just has so much air. With pocket jacks, I think we should be checking behind again. I don't really see many better hands folding, and I don't see many worse hands calling. If we wanted to turn a hand into a bluff, we could pick a worse hand, like maybe pocket 10s or maybe some type of suited connector that we have at a very low frequency. So on the river with king jack, when he bets 3 into 4.6, I almost want to raise for value, but I think it's a bit too thin. I think it's just an easy call. He could be value betting the same hand or worse. He can have a ton of bluffs. Easy call. And he actually shows up with ace queen. So we see another unorthodox and tricky play by a presumed recreational player. So again, be careful. When they take lines they should not be taking, they can have good hands for sure. So don't just say they always would have bet a certain hand on a certain street, so when they bet on later streets, they're always bluffing. That logic doesn't really work. So with jacks, we're facing a very small bet. This makes a lot of sense. He's basically saying that he doesn't have a whole lot of bluffs, and the hands that are worth betting bigger in his shoes kind of block our calling range. So if he has a hand like pocket kings, he's kind of blocking hands like king queen that we may be calling him with. So what is he bluffing with? He has to have some kind of low pair that he turns into a bluff. He has to have some kind of weird suited connector. Most likely he just has a hand like ace-10 suited or a hand like aces. Yeah, maybe even some kind of bluff king, like a king-jack type of hand. So we have many better hands to be calling with as well as raising with. So I don't think we need to defend here, even versus a small sizing. Ace-jack is way too light to be calling with. And king-8 offsuited, I think, is a little bit too weak to be isolating with, unless we have reads on our opponent and think he's extremely weak. I could not help myself but use the RNG one time. So when you're facing a small blind limp, you obviously want to be raising a decent amount. Otherwise, your opponent just always sees the flop and he realizes too much equity. Jack 6 obviously does not get raised too often because, let's be honest, our hand sucks. And the RNG came out very low anyway, so we have no excuse to be checking behind. And he bets 1.5 into 1.9, so a little bit more of a polarized range. I don't see any option but call with this hand. Our hand is way too weak to be value raising, way too strong to be folding. This is not the type of hand you want to turn into a merge bluff. Maybe you could do that with a hand like ace-3, let's say, but not with this hand. And on the turn, kind of the same logic. Our hand is way too weak to be value betting, or a little bit too weak to be value betting, and it's just going to be a clear check behind with the middle of your range. Queens here, we open raise a small blind, obviously. We would happily get the money in blind versus blind. Ace, king, king is an amazing board for us. It's really hard for him to have a lot of equity, right? If he has an ace, he has a great hand. Yeah, if he has a king, he has an amazing hand. He'll have some flush draws, which have good equity, and then only gut shots. And then he just has a lot of undercards, like let's say 6-4 suited, that just have absolutely nothing. So we can be extremely aggressive on a board like this, and even bet our full range if we like. On table 3, 8-5-4. This board is obviously terrible for us. Out of position is going to have every single set. He can have straights. He can have hands like 8-6 for a pair plus a gut shot. He's going to have overcards a lot, a flush draw. We have to be careful here. So with king queen, we have a bit of high card value. We have bad backdoors, so this will usually just be a check behind. Okay, a lot of things going on. So sticking to king queen, on the 4, villain leads out half pot exactly. Sure, we could have the best hand, but the problem is that we don't really have much equity. Even if the river's a deuce and he bets, are we really going to call hoping he has a hand like 10-9 or hoping he has a hand like 9-7? I think we should just fold. It's important to also check back lots of good hands that can fight back against his aggression. So checking back lots of pairs, even flush draws and stuff like that. We're obviously not going to have a 4 very often. But to be fair, neither does he, because he's defending versus a middle position open. Jack 6 here. Is villain going to be checking enough kings on the river or better jacks? I think he'll have some, but not too many. I think we can value bet here. Remember, the pot is less than 5 big blinds. If he, let's say, bets the turn as well and we call, we have an easy check on the river, of course. But I think he can call here with some hands like ace-10, for instance, that he bet. And then he's thinking, well, Villain's going to have lots of 10-9s and queen-9s and maybe some low flush draws. Maybe he floats a hand like 10-7 of spades on the flop. Well, actually 10-7 of spades got there, but you know what I mean. 10-6 of spades, let's say. So I think we can bet here. Obviously, we're not going to be betting really big because then Villain can just fold all of his worst hands. Okay, I cannot resume the action because I'm doing something aggressive here with ace-jack. So the button 3-bets us. I have never seen this player, but the sizing makes him look like a regular. The name, the avatar, the stack size. I'm pretty sure this guy is a regular, even though, as I said, I have no reads on this player. Then Bulldog cold calls, which I think is a bad play, especially out of position. So against Zelix, at least in the last hand with jacks, we would have been in position, so it would have been a bit better. But now he'll be out of position to 2 players. And he's deep with me. And a little bit deeper with Strika. So I think he should not be cold calling at all here. Most likely he just has hands like pocket 8s through pocket jacks, maybe queens, kings, aces, hands like ace king, hands like 10-9 suited and ace queen, let's say. So all pretty good hands, so we can't go too crazy, but not any monsters, or not many monsters at least. So with ace jack here, the problem is our hand is not suited, we're a little bit dominated, we're out of position to Strika, who still has the strongest range. So this is a bit awkward. So I think this hand is going to be a fold or a 4-bet, and I decided to 4-bet this time. If you want to perfect your strategy, you would have to use an RNG most likely, because you cannot just always pick hands like this, because then you're way too aggressive. But let's say for the sake of the video, I decided to be aggressive here. My sizing is not too small because I'm deeper with both of them. And Strika now calls, which is kind of scary. Because he once Strika calls, and then Bulldog calls, the pot's going to be nearly 70 big blinds. So Strika or Stika, let's call him Stika. Stika is going to have a hand like aces sometimes for sure, because he can easily get the money in when there's so little left behind. And then I'm expecting lots of hands like pocket jacks. Let's see what Bulldog does. Meanwhile, on table 4 with queens, I call a quarter pot turn bet. I think against quarter pot, our hand is too strong to be bluff raising with, and our hand is also way too strong to be folding with. You know, we can maybe turn something like a hand like Jack 10 into a bluff sometimes, or a flush draw, or some kind of other gut shot or pair. This hand is just too strong. So he has ace 8, which is reasonable. Facing 2 calls here, that's like the worst possible result. I think we're just done with this hand. I don't think we need to be c-betting our entire 4-betting range here. We have basically no equity. Pocket queens is definitely within both players' ranges. 7s maybe for Bulldog. Some flush draws as well. So I think we have almost no fold equity. And no equity either. So maybe if I had a hand like ace 5 of spades, it would make more sense to start betting. On table 3, we get cold called here, MP against under the gun. You don't really see that much anymore nowadays. I'm expecting his range to be pretty strong because he's out of position to 2 more players, and there's 2 players in the blinds who can still act. So yeah, I don't really like that play by him, but he made it. So I expect him to have hands like ace queen, ace king, some of the mid to high pocket pairs, big suited connectors, maybe some lower suited connectors, maybe some lower pairs. So either way, his range is pretty strong. Ding Dong calls the small blind, so his range is going to be much less strong. He's going to have some hands like suited aces, medium pocket pairs, some broadways as well. So against him, we don't have to be too scared, but against Sanctity, we do. So here, he also bets a little bit larger. We have king high with a weak backdoor flush draw. I think this is just going to be an easy fold. I don't think we need to be check raise bluffing this hand, and check calling is definitely out of the question. Especially when he bets a bit larger. Had he bet like 2 into 7.2, it would have been closer, but still. Remember that his range is very strong at this point. So Stika bets really small here. I think that's a really, really nice play. I like that a lot. I think it's really good. I mean, it's not a rocket science play, but it's good. I like it. And then Bulldog check raises small. If you want to check raise the sizing, I guess it makes sense. But obviously, we both know he's not bluffing. He's got like ace, king of clubs, or he's got something like kings or queens. So his range is kind of face up. So next time this guy check calls, we're going to put a lot of pressure on him because he's just always fast playing good hands, it seems. I mean, he still has to worry about me behind. He has to worry about Stika, and then he check raises here in kind of a crazy spot. I mean, if he has king jack of spades here, then good for him, but I don't think he has that hand very often. So guys, when you see this type of crazy action, don't outplay yourself. Just keep it simple. And I'm definitely not going to be shoving all in. I'm really interested in this hand. So ace-9 suited here. Again, you could use multiple strategies. You can bet big with a polarized range, or bet your whole range for a small sizing. If we want to have a check behind range, ace-9 is a fine hand to be checking behind with, which I did. Against presumed recreational players, I play a bit more of a mixed strategy. Amazing turn. So he bets 3 into 5 here. This looks like another thin value bet to me. As in, he knows I can have ace king. He knows I can have hand like 10s or 2 pair, just any other decent hand. So he bets kind of small. So he probably has something, but something not very good. So if I raise big here, I can probably get him off that hand right now. If I hit, I set up a river shove potentially. And I can also create more fold equity on the river. Although on the river, I'm not sure I would be bluffing. Unless the card is really good for us. Because if he knows that we probably have a good hand and he still calls, he's probably got something decent as well. So I raise big here, which I kind of like. He's a little bit too deep to be shipping, so at least we realize our equity. If he had something like 60 blinds, it would be more awkward. So he calls us, and the river is awful, obviously. He could easily have a flush. He probably doesn't give us credit for too many flushes because we check behind the flop. Although we should have some. So I think this is one of the hands we probably want to be checking behind with. Also with ace-9 of diamonds, we block some diamond draws that he may be folding if we were to bet. So it's more likely he doesn't fold. Luckily, he gives us the easy way out and donk ships. So this is a questionable play by him, but you know, thank you, I guess. Another funny spot here with king 10. So I open raised, which is kind of loose. Dr. Luck cold calls the cutoff. So he's going to have a lot of decently strong hands as well. Similar to Sanctity in the previous hand when I had king queen. He can easily have ace queen. He can easily have hands like pocket 10s and ace 10 suited, etc. Queen jack suited. He's not going to have hands like 6-4 suited, let's say, that just completely missed his board. So we have to be careful. The small blind checks again. So he probably doesn't have the strongest range, although we just saw a hand like ace queen being checked on table 2 a few minutes ago. So I wouldn't rule out a check call by him or even a check raise. So here, you want to be careful that you don't always bet with all of your bluffs. Like you can't bet all of your king 10s, king jacks, jack 10s, flush draws, even some weaker hands than that. You have to be a bit careful. So against a range which still contains some traps as well as a strong cold calling range, yeah, I'm going to take the passive option sometimes. Which, if I recall correctly, I took this time. Dr. Luck can easily have a queen, as I said. King, queen, queen, jack, maybe queen 10. Maybe he just checks back ace queen on the flop as well. Okay, so two interesting spots. I 3-bet queen smaller versus cutoff. I don't think that's very interesting. But the flop is 8-5 deuce. He can have 8s, probably at 100% frequency. Pocket 5s, probably as well. Deuces, I'm not sure. That really depends on the player. So if you think he calls quite a few 3-bets, he probably has deuces. Or if you 3-bet small, he probably has them. But if you're more of a tight 3-better or you 3-bet large, he may not have them. He's also going to have a lot of flushes. You know, all of the ace high flushes, king high flushes, queen high, some of the 6-7s or whatever. So this is a board on which you want to be careful for sure. He can easily have all the good stuff. On a board like ace queen 5, for instance, he may have pocket 5s, but he never has aces or queens. So I elected to check the flop here with pocket queens. And king 3 here. This is a queen 10 deuce is a pretty good board for him. He should be c-betting quite often here because he has queens, he has 10s, and I never do. He also has hands like queen 10 suited that I may 3-bet, or hands like ace queen that I may 3-bet. So yeah, he should be very aggressive. When he doesn't bet, I'm expecting him to have a lot of medium strength hands that he's not going to be folding right away. So when I'm betting, I'm repping kind of a strong range. King 3 suited is okay to be betting with sometimes because you have an overcard, backdoor straight draw, backdoor flush draw, and your hand is probably not good enough at showdown. And if your hand is best on the river, your opponent is probably not going to get you to showdown because he's going to bet. And you cannot call with king high, obviously. King queen here, I think that all three options make a lot of sense. I've never seen Ice punish you before, but he looks like a regular to me. Namron looks like a bit less of a regular to me, although, again, I could be wrong, because most people don't cold call here. So I could call here. The problem is that I'm going to get squeezed quite often. Or my hand is also not that playable. At least I'm in position, though. I could squeeze and get Ice punish you out of the pot very often and get it heads up or just get a fold. I think that probably works better. I think squeezing is better than calling, which is better than folding. But just be careful. You can't just start squeezing hands like queen jack offsuit or ace 10 offsuit unless one of these players is extremely bad. And as I said, I don't really know anything about them yet. So readless, I'm going to just keep it fairly simple and not too crazy, even though this hand is obviously quite loose to be squeezing with. So now on the 3 here, once it gets checked through on table 1, I think I just want to start betting. My hand is a little bit too weak to be trapping with. If I had a hand like, let's say, ace king of diamonds, maybe I want to keep trapping. But you know, I have an overpair, I have a diamond, so my hand is pretty good, especially after the flop action, but probably not good enough to just check call, check raise with, or check call down with. So I like this bet here. King 3 suited, we don't improve our equity at all. We even block some of the hands that he may be check calling with. If he has a hand like ace king of diamonds, he will never fold the flop when I bet, but then obviously he will fold the turn. So yeah, this hand is really bad to be bluffing with on later streets, and we still have other hands. We can, for instance, bluff a hand like jack 9 on the turn. Generally, guys, when you have absolutely no equity, just give up and maybe bluff later streets. Of course, that isn't always the case, but it very often is. King queen, I just snap folded. We don't even have to think about calling such a bad hand out of position to a squeeze. That would have been a disaster. I mean, disaster is probably an understatement. It would have been worse than a disaster for sure. King 3, King river, that's not a disaster by any means. This is pretty simple. If he checks, we bet, and if he bets, we call. Unless he goes for a huge overbet, then we have to decide. I mean, our hand is only one pair, sure, but if we start folding river top pairs here in a small-ish pot, we're just really exploitable. He checks. I mean, I think we just clearly value bet our hand. We can't just go huge because our hand is not good enough. Also, we're saying we probably don't have too many really strong hands in our range, although we all have some. So on table 4, we open 6-3 suited, which is definitely not standard. I don't really like this, to be honest. I've played a bit with Ding Dong before, but I don't really have much of a read on his game. I have the small blind tagged as a recreational player, but I'm not sure. I mean, if the big blind were a recreational player, I'd be more likely to open here. I think this is not a winning open, unless I think I'm significantly better than Ding Dong, which I don't because I don't really know much about him. Jack 10, obviously easy fold. And we get a call with King 3. And villain has 10-9 here. If you want to check the flop, 10-9 is a good hand to do it with because you have one of those perfect medium strength hands. Top pair with an okay kicker and okay backdoor equity. On the river, I think for him, all 3 options make sense. Check raise, check call, as well as check fold. Probably check call being the worst option. But it's very close. I don't think that this is terrible by any means. I would not call him a calling station just by seeing this hand. So 6-3 here will be the last hand of this video, but there will be a second part. Easy check behind now on the turn. Let's talk about the flop quickly. 8-5-5 is one of those boards where you can also have a mixed strategy as well as a pure betting strategy. The 5 is a better card for out of position and in position, but at the same time, it's not amazing, right? Because he's not going to be defending with too many offsuit 5s. It's not like, let's say, a 10 where out of position has a ton of offsuit 10s. So we can probably bet our whole range, but you can also have check behinds. If you play this board versus under the gun, then you're going to have fewer 5s as out of position because against under the gun, obviously you don't defend as many low cards. On the turn, I check back. I have a perfect medium strength check back hand again. And on the river, it's pretty close. If he were to bet small, it's an easy call. If he were to bet big, it's close. If he were to bet huge, it's probably just a fold. He hits this jack quite often. Out of position is obviously not folding ace-jack on the flop. He can have some hands like king-jack as well. Maybe he floats a hand like jack-9 of hearts sometimes on the flop. So it's not the greatest card for us. Luckily, he checks. The problem is that if we bet here, we have to get value out of 4s, 3s, which we block, or deuces, or ace-high. And can we get check raised? Absolutely. So I think it's kind of close, but I think we don't get enough value here, so I prefer just checking. Let's see what he has. Villain has king 6 suited here. That's not a good check call on the flop for obvious reasons. If he had king 6 of hearts, you absolutely cannot fold. And it seems like a small difference, but it's not. Yeah, this is not a good check call. This is way too loose. But he got there. Ace-jack of hearts, well, perfect cliffhanger. We're going to review that in the second part. So thank you for watching. I hope you all learned something. This was MMA Sherlock for the Bluff the Spot High Stakes course. Good luck at the tables.